Okay, let's do an overview of supplier information management from Nipendo's point of view. Really, it's around who knows what about whom, right? And really, the idea here is that the buyers are interested in suppliers and vice versa. And in fact, when you look at how they have it, the buyers have a supplier profile, a profile of who the supplier is and what about them and everything. And the supplier has the same thing about themselves. We'll call a corporate profile. So it's reconciling those two things across all of a buyer's suppliers, as well as the supplier managing having to disseminate this information to different buyers in different formats that those buyers want, with different rules that they impose, and so on. So that's the problem. We kind of map this out in terms of use cases. The main one is adding a new supplier. So maybe a new supplier is introduced through a negotiation process, or an invoice flies in and AP needs to add them to the system, whatever. You need to register that supplier. That's the basic bare minimum information: name, address, vitals, and so on. So when a supplier is registered, that's fine, but then a supplier info request goes across to a supplier saying, please tell us more about you. Give us your W-9, sign an NDA, whatever else that needs to happen. And the supplier is stuck doing what's called we call a corporate profile collaboration, basically taking their information about themselves and filling in the form that's been sent to them. So one way or another that gets filled out, gets sent back, and it's in the form of data about the supplier, but also contact information, documents that are required, even attestations, things that need to be signed off on, like an NDA, for example. And that goes through a process called the onboarding process on the buyer side, basically making sure that supplier has ticked all the boxes and done all the right things, reviewing that, getting different people to approve it for different reasons, and then updating the supplier profile with that information so that they can do business with them. All right, so that's basic stuff. Change happens over time, so sometimes you may have new requirements for a supplier. Even existing suppliers have to meet new requirements, and so that might be an update that needs to happen, and that spurs a request that the supplier then needs to go and react to. And then send back information in the same sort of way as a new supplier and feed that back into the profile. Change also happens on the supplier side. They might move. They might get a subsidiary and break up into two companies with different tax IDs or whatever. Change happens, right? And those things can also spur a reconciliation requirement on the supplier side to tell the buyer about those changes, which then need to be reviewed and updated. The last thing that can happen is an offboarding, that is, making a supplier inactive in the buyer's system so that they can't do more business with them for whatever reason. That happens solely on the buyer side usually, but then needs to be communicated over to the supplier. So let's look at how the manual activities come into play on this. So the manual folks are the AP team in some cases. Maybe it's a supplier risk team or just risk management in general. And they need to do things like manually invite the supplier for onboarding. Usually that's the AP team or the procurement team. And then project manage the multiple approvals and reviews that need to happen throughout that. Enforce evolving requirements for supplier information and risk data. So these are the new things that come across. And then maintain changing data and activation status of the suppliers over time. So these are all manual activities that need to happen and something that we would, at Nipendo, would want to help with. On the supplier side, we also have a way to help, and that is around the suppliers juggling so many buyers asking them so many different things. So they have to fill in a custom request from existing information that they already have, and they have to do that for each customer, so times 100, let's say. So that's quite a bit of manual activity on the supplier side. And then, of course, they have to maintain their corporate info on file with different customers. So they need to know what do you know about me, Mr. Customer, and here's what's changed about that. So again, back to who knows what about whom and almost when they know that. So the last thing is that if you overlay where Nipendo comes in, we bring in our bots to help with automation of different things, the auto invite of ERP suppliers, inviting new suppliers with simple online registration forms, project managing the supplier onboarding process, and finally defining various governance and compliance rules. On the supply side, we want to help give them an ability to have one reference profile, their corporate profile, to use with all their clients. So help them maintain that. help them with the collaboration portal so that they're answering the specific questions and adhering to the particular rules from their customers, and then guiding them for those different rules and making sure that they understand where that comes from, and then managing things like corporate data, docs, financial data, contact information. On the maintenance side of things, there's also help with introducing new rules, updating requirements to the affected suppliers. So doing a specific thing, if a new rule comes that only affects certain suppliers, you only send out the request for those certain suppliers and you do that automatically. You're managing the supplier status based on where they are, and then documenting of probation and other offboarding processes that are out there, because those need to have an audit trail on them. On the supplier side, helping respond to the follow-on requests and managing expiring certifications, distributing to multiple clients when their profile has changed, again, based on those clients' rules, and then finally managing the client-specific changes in contract terms and relationship status and so on. So giving the suppliers some help with their timing on this. Now, what we've done for the demonstration is really focus in on the new supplier introduction process, because you break that into two parts for our demonstration, which are on a different video. The first one is around supplier profile collaboration, which is mostly the supplier's view of things. They get the invite or the registration request. They kind of fill that in, the registration, then they do the major collaboration with all the docs, and they're slinging docs between their corporate profile and what the supplier, what their customer wants, and they're preparing that and sending that out. That's the first demo. The second one is the back half of that, where that filled out information comes over to the buyer, and the buyer is doing their onboarding process. So they're doing multiple reviews. Different people are looking at different things for approvals, and then it's getting an update back into their ERP system. And then we have a little sidelight on that second video around maintaining the governance and compliance rules that are important to all suppliers, and maintaining them so that they're supplier profile specific. So with those two videos, you should be able to cover most of the territory, and really the actions and activities are repeated in the other parts of the slide here.